This is the biggest deal in the coffee world right now, because the Xbloom Studio promises to brew consistently high-quality coffee with the convenience of automation and personalization, so you can experiment and get the best out of your favorite beans in a device that's packed with functionality and new upgrades at a considerably lower price when compared to the original. However, since the day it was announced, most people wonder if this version of the Xbloom is actually worth buying. Hi, I'm Liz, professional barista and former cafe manager, and I believe enjoying good coffee should not be a luxury, which makes this the perfect machine to talk about today for the next reason. It is not cheap. It is cheaper than its predecessor, while also being an upgrade with new features, making many of us ask, what's the catch? Well, we'll get there in this video. And while doing my research, I narrowed down the 3 main reasons users and reviewers cite to justify getting this machine. It is the best investment for enthusiasts who want to enjoy barista-level coffee with minimal effort. It will replace your need for a scale, a grinder, and a gooseneck kettle. And it can replace other pour-over methods, even for prosumers and seasoned baristas. Now, are these claims true? By the end of this video, you'll be able to answer these questions along with many others you probably have, so you can make an informed decision if you're considering to make the Xbloom Studio the next big thing on your coffee bar. Let's go. But first, what is the Xbloom Studio? And what's new about this one? In essence, it's a pod machine for pour-over coffee. The difference being that those pods come with coffee beans that will be ground right before extraction and brewed with the perfect recipe developed by the roaster. But the Xbloom has escaped from this initial concept and becoming so much more than that. This new version, the Studio, is a huge step up, but why is it such a big deal? Well, there's plenty of upgrades compared to the original, almost too many for the short time in between versions. The most notable ones are the addition of an integrated scale that we'll be testing later, and the possibility to use the scale, the grinder, and the brewer independently. We'll go through this and all of the other features, but now let's talk about the new automation modes in this machine. You've got 3 automation modes: Autopilot, Copilot, and Free Solo. Autopilot does exactly as the name suggests. The Xbloom will fly on its own. To use the Autopilot, open up an Xpot and pour the beans in the chute. Xpots now come with a card that you can scan to load the recipe, and you can load through the app if you lose the card. Finally, set the pod in the dock and hit play. This mode is the most convenient of all, since everything is already weighed out and dialed in to perfection. You know you will be honoring that coffee and the results will be flawless with very little effort. But if you want more flexibility and would like to use the Xbloom with your favorite beans, then you can try the Copilot mode. For this, we'll be using the Omni Dripper 2, which is now static-free. Let's grab a filter and snuck it in there. The Omni Dripper has these ridges to keep the filter in place, which makes it delightful to use and less prone to error. The base is also swappable and easy to remove to clean it up. Now, take the dosing cup, place it on the scale, tare, and weigh out the beans. The Omni Dripper's maximum capacity is around 18 grams, as the Xbloom is intended as a single cup brewer. For the sake of this cup though, I'll use 15 grams. At this point, you have a few choices. You may scan the card with a preset 3-pour recipe and just go. Just as before, the Omni Dripper will slide to the left, grind and brew as per the settings in here. If you want 4 or 5 pours, there are also preset recipes for those using the app. If you want to be even more granular and customize more settings, you're totally able to do this on the app. The amount of customization is insane. Maybe even more than you want or need to, but we'll get into all of these details later. Oh, and before you start, remember to put the cup in here. I'm guilty of constantly forgetting this step. Luckily, if you do forget, you can always pause and restart once you're ready. Something about the Omni Dripper though, is that the filters are specifically designed for it. However, if you've got a bunch of Kalita 155 filters, they'll also work just right. And talking about other brewers, let's discuss the most interesting mode of all, Free Solo. In this mode, you have total control over each and every aspect of the brew. You can mix and match functionalities as you wish. And while the convenience of Autopilot and Copilot is good enough reason for many people to buy this machine, in Free Solo you can also use it paired with other brewers you might already own, like the V60, a Clever Dripper, or an AeroPress. But here's the thing, many home baristas would like to know if what they're getting from this device is totally worth what they paid for. It's got a scale, but is it truly accurate? It can grind, but is it good enough on its own? And it does brew, but is it more than just a fancy kettle? Spoiler alert, here is where the Xbloom Studio truly shines, especially above the original one. But don't just take my words for granted. Let's see all of this in action, starting with the scale. The integrated scale is capable of measuring up to 2 kilograms with high precision. To test out how precise, let's grab this 100 grams weight and see how accurate the entire plate is. The variance seems to be from 0.1 up to 0.2 grams in the different spots of the scale, which is actually great, especially this is a pretty big surface and you will most likely be weighing out in the middle, but it definitely shows more exactitude. Worth mentioning that I don't have a 500 gram weight to fully calibrate it as most people want. The response time is also fantastic, as you can see displayed here on the screen. The machine uses it to detect the liquids falling and give you an accurate reading of your brews. But you can fully operate the scale on its own using only this knob. But does it replace a separate scale altogether? Well, if all you do is drip, pour over, or filter coffee, sure, you could measure it all in here. But if you also do espresso, then this can't be the only scale you use. Now, is it good enough to be justified for the cost of this machine? I'll do a comparison in a moment. But let's talk about the next big thing, the grinder. Honestly, the grinder blew my mind. Anytime we talk about a built-in grinder, there's always some sort of skepticism, especially when things seem too good to be true. A machine that promises to excel in both grinding and brewing seems way too good to be true, let alone providing such a wide range for grinding from cold brew coarse to espresso fine. Inside, we have a 48mm conical burr with 80 different grinding sizes. So I was not overly hyped initially and approached it with a little bit of caution. The first brew was with an Xbot and it was fantastic, naturally, but I then started to play with it. I dialed in my own beans with the Omni Dripper, then with a V60, then an AeroPress, and there were still several numbers to go down. This is when I noticed this grind size chart here in the water tank flap and the word espresso in it. Is this for real? I mean, the only way to know is trying. And boy, does it deliver. Even though it's not advertised for this purpose, you can achieve espresso. In fact, the magnetic dosing cup is 58mm wide and fits perfectly into any industry standard portafilter. Of course, there are limitations. The lighter the roast, the more complicated it'll get, but the fact stands that it is attainable. The new Xbloom Studio also allows you to change the RPM between 60 and 120, allowing for even more customization and experimentation, especially in a built-in grinder. Another thing that really impressed me is the anti-static ionizer. There are close to no fines and chaff flying around and making a huge mess. And that's easy to achieve with a magnetic dosing cup, which doesn't leave any space left for grounds to fly. You can also see it with the pots. It's a pretty clean machine. So with the Xbloom Studio, you'll now have an all-purpose grinder that can cover all of your day-to-day brewing methods. Now the price begins to feel even better, doesn't it? Let's seal the deal with the most important element here, the brewer. And before we do, if you're getting value from this video, please consider liking it and subscribing to my channel. Your support really helps me grow and keep these videos coming. Some may think this is just a high-tech kettle, but I'm sorry to break it to you, it is not. Coming from the original version, the Xbloom already features something unprecedented. The spout was able to move in a circular motion to fully saturate the coffee bed. That was disrupted for the home brewing market when compared to other brewers that only feature a static pour. But it also had some flaws. In this version, the Xbloom Studio upgraded to a patented kinematic spout that pours water with a consistent flow onto the coffee bed. You can use the knob or the app to customize pouring patterns depending on what you're brewing. So you can pour in the center, or the spiral, or in a circular motion. If you use the app, you can go as detailed as programming different motions for different stages of the brew, as well as selecting whether you want agitation or not, adjust the flow rate, or even the water temperature for each pour. Talking about water temperature, my goodness, this heats up fast. It's honestly quite impressive, almost instant. It's gotten to a point where I am using this to brew my tea as well, because this way I don't have to wait for my kettle to heat up. I think I haven't used my kettle since I got it. This instant heater feature ensures that the brewer will only heat up the exact amount of water required for each pour, which minimizes energy consumption. You can choose your water to be between 40 and 95 degrees Celsius, or its Fahrenheit equivalent. To use the brewer, you can start pouring either through the app or using the knobs, which allow you to select water temperature and your preferred motion. However, you cannot choose volume with this. If you wanted more or less water, you'd have to pause as needed, which really isn't the end of the world if your phone is unavailable. I've noticed that standard recipes call for around 250 ml, but you can set it up to dispense up to 500 ml at once or choose the ratio that works best for your brew within this range. With this said, I find the water tank is too small and I have to refill constantly, although it's seemingly bigger than the original version that could only make about 2 cups. You can now make around 3. And big change, you now have the option to plumb it in and eliminate this downside. But keep in mind that it only works with a static water source, say a water tank next to the Xbloom. If you want to plumb it in directly into a pressurized water system, you need to buy a separate inline pressure regulator. But this is just an extra expense I personally don't think necessary unless you really need it. So yes, every single module of the Xbloom Studio is now independent and they all perform as a good device on their own, which you can use for multiple other purposes like making tea or even cooking. There are of course some limitations related to the height of the device, so you can't put an 8-cup Chemex for example, or even brew with a tall cup. I find this stance extremely funny every time I forget and put my carafe before I begin. This doesn't take from the versatility, but remember, the Xbloom is meant for single cup brewing. At home we're used to smaller cups and tasting lots of coffee throughout the day, so usually any given cup we just split it in 2. We're still gonna talk about the app, the overall value of this machine, and I gotta rate it. But there's a lingering question around that I'd like to answer first. How did they lower the cost from the original? And what's the catch? I mean, this is an upgrade, right? The most obvious is the change of build material, which is now mostly plastic, whereas the original was made out of metal. I gotta say, they did right here by improving the design, and I don't think anyone will complain about this choice. Some details, like the drip tray, might feel a bit cheaper, but then you get an improved Omni dripper with the anti-static coating and actual knobs that feel great to use with excellent grip. They certainly didn't hold back in the high contact areas, so kudos to the product developers. The original didn't have any buttons or knobs, and everything had to be done through the app. But let's discuss. How good and useful is the Xbloom app? I won't give you a conclusion and will let you figure this out yourself by watching this. The machine connects to your phone via Bluetooth, and then you're able to manage absolutely everything from here. You can operate the scale, the grinder, and the brewer from a distance. Not to mention totally customize your recipes. I'm talking everything. It may be even a bit overwhelming. You can determine dose, yield, flow rate, number of pours, volume per pour, the motion of the spout, and water temperature of each pour. If you want agitation or not, and if you do you want it before or after? You can also decide if you're gonna use the grinder or not and to which grind size. After you've set everything up, you're then able to save this recipe and use it again as needed, and even share it with other people who own an Xbloom. Once the brew is happening, you have a graph that is recording everything going on with your brew live. And what I love the most is that you can place your phone in this division here to watch it as it goes, or even watch something else hands-free as your coffee brews. However, the Xbloom Studio is not the perfect machine, and I know they know it, and are already gathering data for the next version, which I'm sure will come in time. So, how can they make it even better in the future? There aren't many things that I will change, but I do have some pet peeves, as anyone would. First, a small tiny thing, but why isn't the Omni dripper white for the white version of this machine? It somehow feels out of place to me. This of course doesn't affect functionality, it's just an aesthetic observation. Next, the filters. The machine comes with temp filters for the Omni dripper, and I don't know about you, but we had gone through those by day 2. The filters are proprietary from Xbloom. They're not crazy expensive, but distribution is limited at the time. You can use Kalita 155 filters, but keep in mind that the width and the density of the paper is different. Therefore, if you are, for example, buying a certain blend to replicate the recipe of an X-Pot, you may have to do some variations in grind size to get the same results as with an actual Xbloom filter. They could either include more in the future or make them more available. But the greatest thing I'd like to see upgraded is one they could technically do right away. And I'm talking about the ability to save your default recipes. This feels like a small firmware update that could make a huge impact. And here's what I would love to see. 1. Being able to change the default recipe in this card to whatever your preset recipe is. So, say you're living with a coffee for a week, you got it all nailed down, and you're ready to use it without having to use your phone. 2. The machine could also have a memory of the last recipe you used that you can quickly access through the knobs without having to rely on the app. Just pour the beans and hit play. Finally, this might be a long shot, but for iPhone owners, imagine you could save these cards to your wallet. That would be so nice, don't you think? Anywho, those are just my random thoughts, and I'm sure the Xbloom team is receiving tons of feedback they may or may not apply in future versions of this machine. Hopefully, some of that will be considered. So, with all of this said, what is the true value of the Xbloom Studio? Is it a justified investment? And who is it for? The Xbloom Studio is currently priced at $500. I want us to consider all it can do and everything it could potentially replace. At the end of the day, a good quality gooseneck temperature control kettle is at least $100, and at the speed it heats up the water, then at the very least $150. As for the scale, a decent scale for your pour-overs, not even the very best, will set you back at least $70 to $100 and up to $200 depending on what you get. And let's not even get started with the grinder. The grinder is in itself probably worth the cost of the machine. But let's assign a cost of $250 to $300. Add to that all of the tech and automation capabilities, plus the included accessories, and right there, you've already paid for what you're getting. Of course, not everyone will be convinced by this machine, especially those who love the manual ritual of pour-over. But I'm one of those, and I still see myself using this daily, especially when I just don't have the time to brew my own and I still want something really good to start the day. So if you're like me, this is absolutely a must. But this is also for those who like to experiment with specialty coffee and play around with variables. Anyone who's nitpicky with data will have a blast with this machine. And much better yet, will be able to replicate those successful cups time and time again. But who I think will enjoy this machine the most is people who love quality pour-over coffee but don't know how to make it, or don't have the time to perfect it, so they just don't get to enjoy it as often as they want. Let's admit it, brewing good pour-over consistently is a long and difficult journey. An example of this perfect user is my husband. He may not realize it yet, but I've turned him into a coffee snob. But he doesn't have the patience to brew it. Since we got the Xbloom, he now starts his morning with a great cup of coffee and doesn't have to rely on me to make it anymore. In fact, the exactitude of the pours and predictability of an already dialed-in coffee exceeds what I could achieve in terms of consistency. He's been incredibly happy with it and claims this is his machine and has been having a blast with it since it got here. So if you're anything like my husband, this is the perfect machine for you. This is why I give the Xbloom Studio a Happy Bean rating of 4.0, which means the state-of-the-art automated pour-over machine is giving you exactly what you're paying for, and this will be a very satisfying purchase no matter how experienced you are. Xbloom knocked it out of the park with this machine. I'm truly amazed at what it can do and eager to see how it will develop in the future. Remember to subscribe. Thank you for watching and happy sipping.